wind whistled through the broken boards of the old cabin, carrying with it the smell of pine and the faint sound of distant laughter. Somewhere down the dirt road, a group of teenagers were daring each other to throw rocks at the rusted tin roof. It wasn't the first time. "Why don't you just burn that old shack down, Vance?" one of them shouted, their voice sharp with cruel amusement. The man inside didn't move. He sat in the dim light of his lantern, shoulders slouched, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His weathered hands, scarred from years of hard work and harder battles, clenched the wooden edge until his knuckles turned white. His name was Samuel Vance, though most folks in town didn't bother remembering. Around here he was just the washed-up vet, the man who lived alone in the woods with a mutt for company. They didn't care that once upon a time he wore a uniform with pride, serving in places most of them couldn't even find on a map. They didn't care that he had medals tucked away in an old box, medals he never looked at because they only reminded him of the friends who never came home. All they saw was the cabin, the peeling paint, the broken porch steps, the roof that sagged like an old man's shoulders. To them, Samuel wasn't a hero. He was a joke. But if anyone had stepped closer that night, if anyone had looked past the curtain of shadows and the silence that wrapped around the cabin, they would have seen something different. They would have seen the dog, a German shepherd, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, lying at his master's feet. His name was Ranger, and while the world had turned its back on Samuel, Ranger never had. The dog's ears twitched as the laughter faded into the night. His gaze shifted, not toward the kids who had mocked them, but to the floorboards under the table. Ranger's body stiffened, his ears perked up. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not loud but certain. Samuel frowned, looking down at him. "What is it, boy?" The dog stood suddenly, moving to the corner of the cabin where the floor met the stone foundation. His nose pressed against the cracks, sniffing, pawing lightly as though something was buried deep beneath. Samuel shook his head, exhaling a long, tired breath. "Probably just a mouse," he muttered, though his voice carried no conviction. Ranger's growl deepened, his eyes fixed, unblinking. Not on a mouse, not on a shadow, on something else, something hidden. Samuel rubbed his temples and reached for the whiskey bottle on the table. The burn in his chest was easier to face than the questions in his dog's eyes. But Ranger didn't move. He stayed there, staring at the floorboards, like a soldier refusing to abandon his post. The next morning, Samuel woke to the sound of Ranger scratching. The dog had spent half the night curled on the spot, refusing to budge even when called. Now, in the pale dawn light, he dug at the wood with fierce determination. "Ranger," Samuel barked, pulling on his boots. "Leave it." But the shepherd didn't stop. His paws tore at the rotting planks until splinters flew. A deep, hollow echo answered with every strike. Samuel froze. His heart skipped. That wasn't the sound of solid earth beneath the cabin. It was the sound of a space, a cavity. The dog stepped back, panting, tail low but eyes fixed on the gap he had made. Samuel knelt reluctantly, pressing his hand against the broken board. He hesitated, then pulled. The plank groaned but lifted free. Beneath the floor was darkness. A cold draft rose from it, smelling faintly of rust and earth. Samuel swallowed hard. His hand trembled, though he wasn't sure if it was from fear or the lack of whiskey in his system. The dog whined softly, nudging his master forward, urging him to look. But Samuel Vance wasn't ready, not yet. He dropped the board back into place, grabbed his coat and stormed out of the cabin, ignoring the way Ranger's ears flattened in protest. He didn't know what was under there, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. All he knew was this. The dog had found something, something that didn't belong, something that could explain why strangers had started showing up near his land at night, why he had the eerie sense of being watched whenever he went into town, why the lawyer who once called about his late father's estate had warned him cryptically to be careful out there. He thought the cabin was nothing but a ruin, but Ranger knew better. And soon the world would too. The old diner bell jingled as Samuel pushed open the door. He hadn't planned on coming into town that morning, but the growling hole under his cabin floor had left his chest tight with unease. He needed supplies, food, nails, maybe another bottle to quiet his thoughts. Conversations hushed the moment he stepped inside. Forks clinked on plates. A pair of farmers near the window gave him a sidelong glance, muttering under their breath. Samuel kept his head down, moving to the counter. He could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their judgment pressing harder than the pack on his back ever did overseas. "Coffee," he muttered. His voice was gravel, low from too many cigarettes and too many nights without sleep. The waitress, Mary Ellen, poured the cup but didn't smile. She slid it toward him, keeping her distance like he carried disease. "You hear those kids were at your place again last night?" she asked finally. Her tone wasn't curious, it was accusatory. Samuel's jaw tightened. "I heard." "You ought to do something about that shack. It's falling apart, Sam. Whole town's tired of looking at it." He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because he already knew what they thought, that the cabin was a symbol of failure, that he was a bitter reminder of wars no one wanted to remember. The truth was, Samuel hadn't meant to stay. When he came back from overseas, he told himself it was temporary, just a year in the woods to clear his head. But 1 year turned into 5, then 10. And the cabin, it wasn't just his. It had belonged to his father, a stern man, cold and distant, who left more questions than answers when he died. Samuel inherited the land, but never the reasons why his father clung to it until his last breath. A heavy sigh escaped him as he slid coins across the counter for the coffee. Mary Ellen didn't thank him. She just scooped them up and moved on. Behind him a voice rang out, too loud, too sharp. "Hey, Sam, how's the war hero life treating you? Still talking to ghosts?" Laughter followed. Samuel didn't turn. His fingers curled tight around the mug, but he stayed still. He had learned long ago that silence hurt less than swinging back. But there was one pair of eyes in that room that didn't laugh. Through the diner window, parked across the street, Ranger sat patiently in the bed of the old pickup. His ears pricked, his body alert. The shepherd's gaze locked on his master like a lifeline, grounding him. Samuel finished the coffee in one long swallow, dropped a few more coins and left. The whispers followed him out the door. The drive back felt longer than usual. The cabin seemed to loom from the trees, its warped timbers standing like a sentinel against time. Ranger leapt down the moment the truck stopped, padding across the dirt toward the porch, and straight to the corner where he had dug the night before. "Not again," Samuel muttered, setting the grocery bag down. But Ranger was relentless. He scratched, sniffed, poured until more splinters lifted free. A hollow echo answered again, louder this time. Samuel crouched, pressing his ear close. Thump. A faint, metallic resonance. His brows furrowed. That wasn't stone. It wasn't earth. It was something man-made. Ranger stepped back, watching him. His dark eyes gleamed with urgency, as if he were saying, "This matters. Don't ignore it." But Samuel did. Not because he didn't believe the dog. He did. He always did. He ignored it because the thought of digging deeper, of uncovering whatever his father had left behind, terrified him more than facing enemy fire. The past had teeth. He had scars to prove it. He shoved the groceries onto the counter, pulled out the bottle and twisted the cap. The first swallow burned like fire, numbing the edges of thought. The second dulled them further. By the third, the cabin was nothing but silence again. But Ranger didn't drink. He didn't forget. He didn't move from that spot on the floor. All night, the dog kept vigil. 3 days passed before Samuel gave in. It wasn't the whispers in town. It wasn't even the memories that crept in when he tried to sleep. It was Ranger. The dog refused to give up. Every morning, every evening, he pawed at the boards, his insistence growing sharper. He wouldn't eat until Samuel acknowledged it. He wouldn't rest unless his master stood near the spot. Finally, with a muttered curse, Samuel grabbed his crowbar from the shed. "All right, boy, you win." The shepherd's ears perked, his tail giving a single wag before stilling again. Samuel wedged the iron tip under the cracked board. The wood groaned, popped, snapped free. Then another. And another. Until a square opening yawned at his feet. The air that rose was cold, stale, tinged with something metallic. He leaned closer, lantern in hand. The light flickered downward, swallowed by a darkness that seemed to breathe. A wooden ladder descended into the void. Its rungs were old but sturdy, leading into a narrow chamber carved beneath the cabin. Samuel's throat tightened. This wasn't a root cellar. This was built with purpose. The lantern's glow revealed edges of rusted steel and faint outlines of crates stacked against the walls. Ranger growled softly, hackles rising. Samuel froze, gripping the crowbar tighter, his pulse hammered. Because for the first time in years he realized the truth. The cabin wasn't just falling apart, it was hiding something. And whatever his father had left behind, it wasn't meant to stay buried. Samuel stood at the edge of the hole, staring into the dark as if it were staring back at him. The lantern light barely penetrated the void, but what it revealed was enough to make his chest tighten. The wooden ladder stretched down maybe 12 feet, disappearing into shadow. The steel lining in the walls caught the glow, dull with age but unmistakably reinforced. This wasn't the work of some farmer hiding root vegetables. This was deliberate, military, his father's work. Samuel's throat was dry, his fingers curled tighter around the crowbar, the iron cold and slick with sweat. Behind him, Ranger let out a low whine as if urging him forward. The dog's body was taut, muscles rippling with alertness, ears pricked toward the dark opening. "You really think we should go down there, boy?" Samuel muttered. His voice sounded small against the silence of the cabin. Ranger huffed softly through his nose, the same way he always did when he was sure of something. Samuel drew a long breath. "Fine, but if there's something down there, I don't like your taking point." The shepherd's tail gave one slow wag, as if in agreement. The first rung creaked beneath Samuel's weight. His palms stung against the splintered wood as he lowered himself, each step echoing faintly. Ranger whined above, circling the opening nervously. Then, without hesitation, leapt down after him. The dog landed with a heavy thud at the base, shaking himself before lifting his nose high, sniffing the stale air. Samuel dropped the last few feet and turned slowly in the dim glow of the lantern. The chamber wasn't large, maybe the size of a small shed, but it was built with precision. Reinforced steel lined the walls, the seams bolted tight. Wooden crates sat stacked along one side, their corners chewed by time but still sturdy. A rusted work table rested against the far wall, scattered with tools and yellowed papers. And in the center of the back wall, a safe, tall, heavy, the kind meant to hold more than money. Samuel's breath hitched. His father had kept secrets. That much he had always known. But seeing them here, tangible and locked away beneath the family cabin, made those secrets feel alive. Ranger sniffed at one of the crates, then let out a short bark. "Easy," Samuel whispered, kneeling to brush dust off the nearest box. The stenciled letters were faded, barely legible. "Property of U.S. Army, do not remove." He stared at it for a long time, a sick knot twisting in his gut. His father had never served, not officially, anyway. Samuel had worn the uniform, bled in it, carried brothers home in it. And here lay crates marked with the same stamp, hidden as if they were contraband. His father had always kept distance, always carried that air of a man who knew more than he let on. Samuel remembered long nights of hearing him in the cabin, office, the low drone of a radio, the steady scratch of a pen. Whenever Samuel opened the door, his father's face would snap up, eyes sharp, words clipped. "Not now, son." And now all those not nows had teeth. He pried the first crate open. The lid screeched, splinters flying until the contents came. Into view, not weapons, not explosives, documents, stacks of files sealed in plastic sleeves, the edges yellowed but preserved. Samuel lifted one carefully, his calloused fingers trembling as he pulled the sleeve close to the lantern light. Handwritten notes, coordinates, names underlined, circled, and maps. Maps marked with strange symbols and coded annotations. His pulse thudded louder. These weren't keepsakes. This wasn't a paranoid man scribbling nonsense. This was intelligence, the kind only someone on the inside or someone working against the inside would risk everything to keep. He sifted deeper. Old tape reels, photographs sealed in envelopes, letters typed on thin military stationery. He pulled one free and unfolded it. The typewriter ink had bled slightly, but the words were clear. Operation Redwood compromised. Assets must remain hidden until retrieval. Trust no one. Keep the dog close. Samuel froze. Keep the dog close. His eyes darted to Ranger, who was watching him, silent, patient, a shadow in the lantern glow. The shepherd tilted his head, as if echoing the words without sound. Samuel swallowed hard, stuffing the letter back. His hands shook as he pulled another envelope, this one stuffed with black and white photographs, men in uniform. Locations that looked foreign, arid, hostile, and then one photo made his heart stop. It was his father, younger, standing in front of a hangar, shaking hands with a man Samuel recognized instantly, a general, the same General Samuel had served under. Decades later, "What the hell were you into, old man?" he whispered. Ranger gave a low growl, breaking his trance. The dog was facing the safe now, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. A warning. Samuel followed his gaze. The safe loomed taller than him, its wheel lock rusted but intact. His palms went clammy. His father's voice whispered in memory, sharp, commanding, always leaving more unsaid than said. If the crates were this damning, what was inside that safe? He stepped closer, pressed his ear to the cold steel. The silence on the other side felt heavier than the mountain itself. Hours bled into each other as he searched. The files sprawled across the table, a paper trail of shadows leading nowhere and everywhere at once. His bottle sat unopened by the lantern. For the first time in years, he didn't crave its burn. His veins burned hot enough with questions. One point he leaned back, closing his eyes. He saw his father again, not as the cold shadow he remembered, but as a man who had lived with this chamber buried under his feet. A man who had built a vault of secrets while pretending to live an ordinary life. What had it cost him? And now, what would it cost Samuel? A noise snapped him awake. Soft, distant. Not from within the chamber. From above. The boards creaked. A faint shuffle like weight pressing on the cabin floor. Ranger was already on his feet. Hackles raised, lips curled in a silent snarl. Samuel doused the lantern instantly, plunging them into thick black. His pulse roared in his ears. He held his breath, straining to hear another creak. Then silence. Whoever it was, they knew the cabin wasn't empty, and they were careful. Too careful. Samuel's grip tightened on the crowbar. His father's words from the letter seared his mind again. Trust no one. Keep the dog close. He crouched. Low Ranger pressed against his leg, both of them motionless as stone. The intruder above moved once more, slow, deliberate. Then, nothing. Just the long silence of a man who knows he's being listened for. Samuel's throat went dry, because now, it was no longer a question of what his father had hidden. It was a question of who already knew, and how far they'd go to take it. The silence pressed in like a weight. Samuel crouched low in the chamber, his breath shallow, every muscle coiled tight. Above, the faint groan of a floorboard echoed like thunder in his ears. Someone was up there, careful, deliberate, testing. The cabins creaked the way a predator tests a snare. Ranger's body was stone against his leg, the shepherd's hackles sharp as knives under Samuel's hand. The dog's eyes gleamed faintly in the dark, fixed upward, waiting for his signal. Samuel's heart hammered. He hadn't felt this surge of adrenaline in years, not since the ambush in Kandahar that left 3 of his brothers dead and him limping for weeks. This wasn't just some nosy neighbor stumbling in. Whoever was up there knew what they were doing, and that meant they weren't here for him. They were here for what lay beneath. Slowly, Samuel leaned forward, pressing his ear against the steel wall of the chamber. The sound carried faintly but enough, the creak of deliberate steps, slow pacing. The intruder wasn't rifling through drawers or slamming cabinets. No, they were listening, the same way he was, searching for life. For him, Samuel's jaw clenched. He slid his hand along the workbench until his fingers closed around a long, rusted pipe. Not a rifle, but it would do. His military training screamed at him. Confront or evade. Wait them out or strike first. Above, a shadow shifted across the faint square of moonlight spilling through the floorboards. Then, silence, the kind that prickled at the back of his neck. The intruder had stopped moving. He was listening too. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat rolled down Samuel's spine, his grip tightening on the pipe until his knuckles ached. Ranger didn't move, didn't even breathe loud enough to betray them. Finally, faintly, the boards groaned again. Steps, slow and retreating this time. Then a pause near the front door, the squeal of rusty hinges, a long beat of silence. Then the door clicked shut. Samuel held still, waiting. 5 seconds. 10. A full minute. Only then did he let out the breath he'd been holding, shoulders sagging. Ranger whined softly, ears swiveling. Samuel laid a hand on his neck. Good boy, real good boy. But his gut told him the truth. Just because the intruder left didn't mean the danger had. Climbing back up the ladder felt like crawling out of a grave. Samuel's palms were slick with sweat, his boots scuffing against the rungs. Ranger scrambled up behind him with silent grace, leaping to the cabin floor as Samuel emerged. The air upstairs felt colder now, though the night outside was still. The lantern light flickered against the warped boards, stretching shadows across the cabin walls. Samuel froze in the center of the room. Something was off. He scanned slowly. The table, the chair, the faded curtains, all exactly as he'd left them. Then his eyes landed on the counter. His unopened whiskey bottle sat where it always did, but the glass beside it was gone, vanished. Samuel's mouth went dry. He hadn't poured a drink since finding the chamber. Whoever had been here, they had touched his things, sat where he sat, and then they'd left, careful to put everything else back in place, except the glass. Why take it? Fingerprints, DNA. They wanted to know who he was. The thought sent a cold shiver crawling up his spine. He locked the cabin door, though it felt like a paper shield against a storm, then returned to the hidden chamber with Ranger at his heels. The files still sprawled across the table, mute sentinels of secrets. But now the safe seemed to loom even larger, its steel face daring him to open it before someone else did. Samuel paced, running a hand through his hair. Old man, what the hell did you leave me in the middle of? His father had never been warm. Never been the type to teach him how to throw a ball or share a beer after a hard day. But now Samuel realized every late-night call, every closed-door conversation, every stern look across the dinner table, it had all been pieces of this, of redwood. He pulled one of the journals closer, flipping to a page marked with his father's jagged handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Trust the dog. He'll know before you do. Redwood was never meant to touch U.S. soil, but they brought it here. I did what I had to. If they find you, you'll have to do the same. Don't open the safe until you're ready. Samuel's stomach twisted. He shoved the journal away, leaning back in the chair until it creaked under his weight. Ready? He muttered bitterly. I wasn't even ready to bury you. Ranger rested his head on Samuel's thigh, eyes steady, grounding him. For a moment, Samuel let the silence swallow him. The world felt suspended. Just him, the dog, the secrets, and the dark. Then, in the distance, a sound shattered it. Engines, more than one. Samuel shot to his feet, heart pounding. Ranger's ears flicked, nose twitching. The engines rumbled low, muffled but growing. Vehicles crawling the dirt road that led nowhere except this cabin. They were coming. Panic surged hot in Samuel's chest. He swept the files back into the crate, shoving the journal down deep, yanking the crowbar into his grip. Ranger bristled beside him, growling low, teeth flashing in the lantern glow. Headlights cut through the cracks in the cabin walls, sharp beams slicing across the dark. 3, maybe 4 vehicles. They stopped. Doors opened. Boots crunched gravel. Men's. Voices, low, terse, practiced. Not police, not neighbors, professionals. Samuel's father's warning pounded in his skull. Trust no one. Keep the dog close. The cabin shuddered as a heavy hand slammed against the front door. A voice rang out, calm and cold. James Vance's boy, we know you're in there. Best not to make this difficult. Samuel's grip on the crowbar turned to stone. His pulse thundered, because now it wasn't just about secrets or his father or the safe. It was about survival, and they weren't here to talk. The pounding on the door rattled the cabin walls, every thud echoing like a death knell in Samuel's chest. Ranger bristled at his side, growl vibrating deep in his throat, teeth glinting in the flickering lamplight. James Vance's boy, the voice repeated, steady and cold. We don't want blood. Just open the door, hand over what belongs to us, and walk away alive. Samuel's hand clenched tighter around the crowbar, sweat slicking the rusted metal. He could hear the muffled shuffle of boots outside, more than two, more than three. A whole squad, professionals, and they weren't bluffing. He backed away from the door, Ranger shadowing his steps. The dog's ears pricked, eyes fixed, ready to spring. Samuel's mind raced. No phone service this far out, no neighbors within, shouting distance. No cavalry coming. It was him, the dog, and the cabin. The first shot came without warning. Glass exploded as a round cracked through the front window, showering the room in shards. Samuel ducked low, dragging Ranger with him, as a second shot splintered the back wall. Dust rained down from the rafters. "Last chance," another voice barked. "We'll burn this place to the ground if we have to." Samuel's blood surged hot. They wanted him scared. They wanted him desperate. But fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. He'd survived worse. He dropped flat and scrambled to the chamber entrance, yanking the hatch open. "Go!" he hissed. Ranger bounded down into the dark without hesitation. Samuel slid after him, pulling the hatch shut, just as heavy boots thundered onto the porch. From below he heard the door crash inward, wood splintering like bones. Voices filled the cabin above, angry, confident, tearing through the place. Samuel pressed his ear to the chamber ceiling. "Check the back," one barked. "Basement," another suggested. "Old man said there was something under here." Samuel's gut clenched. Old man, they'd spoken to his father, or someone who had known him. That meant this wasn't just a hunt for treasure. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Ranger's low growl drew his attention. The dog stood, rigid near the far wall, nose pressed against the steel of the safe. Samuel's breath caught. The intruders wanted this. But how did Ranger know? He crouched beside the dog, running his hand along the cool steel. The keypad blinked faintly, waiting. He thought of his father's journals, the scribbled notes, the warnings. Don't open the safe until you're ready. Ready or not, if the eye. Men upstairs found it. Everything his father had hidden would be gone. A sudden crash above cut his thoughts short. Boards ripped, voices barked. "They're here! Down below!" Samuel's blood iced. They'd found the hatch. He grabbed the crowbar, wedged it under the workbench, and with one heave sent the heavy table toppling over the hatch entrance. Seconds later, fists pounded from above. "Move it!" Metals screeched as they tried forcing the hatch. Samuel and Ranger backed to the far wall, the shepherd's teeth bared, growl rumbling like a warning drum. Samuel's mind spun. They couldn't hold forever, not against men with rifles. He scanned the chamber, desperate. His eyes snagged on a faded schematic pinned to the wall, something he'd overlooked before. A map of the cabin, lines drawn in his father's sharp hand, and there, faintly inked at the bottom, was a narrow tunnel snaking away from the chamber. An escape route. "Dad, you old bastard," Samuel muttered. He shoved the crate of journals aside, revealing a steel hatch half buried under dust. The hinges groaned as he forced it open. Stale air rushed out, damp and cold. Ranger, inside. The dog hesitated only long enough to glance at Samuel, then leapt into the tunnel. Samuel dropped after him, pulling the hatch shut as the hatch above finally gave way with a deafening crack. Shouts rang out. Boots clanged down the ladder. Samuel and Ranger slipped into darkness, crawling through the narrow tunnel as the chamber filled with hostile voices. The passage was tight, damp, smelling of earth and rust. Samuel's shoulders scraped stone as he crawled, Ranger's paws clicking softly ahead. The sounds of pursuit echoed faintly behind. The men had found the chamber, but not yet the tunnel. Not yet. Minutes crawled by. The air grew cooler, fresher. Finally, Samuel's hand struck wood. A panel. He shoved hard, and the hatch gave way. Moonlight spilled in. They scrambled out into the forest, leaves crunching underfoot, the cabin glowing faintly behind them where flashlights bobbed in the windows. For a heartbeat, Samuel let the night air fill his lungs. Then a shout split the dark. There, in the trees. Bullets ripped bark as he and Ranger dove for cover. The forest became a war zone. Samuel zigzagged between trunks, branches whipping his face, Ranger a shadow at his side. Gunfire barked behind them, hot lead chewing through leaves. He slid behind a fallen log, chest heaving. Ranger crouched low, growling. Voices closed in, disciplined, coordinated. These weren't thugs. They were trained. Ex-military, maybe. Mercenaries. His father's enemies had sent the best. Samuel's hand tightened on the crowbar. He was outgunned, outnumbered, but not outmatched, not yet. Because he had two things they didn't. The woods in his blood. And a dog that never quit. "Flank left," one shouted. Samuel smirked grimly. Too predictable. He waited until the voice grew closer, footsteps crunching. Then he rose, fast and silent, crowbar swinging. The metal cracked against a skull with a sickening thud. The man crumpled. Ranger launched like a missile, slamming into another attacker's arm. The rifle clattered away as the shepherd's jaws locked, growl vibrating through the night. Samuel seized the gun, spinning, firing into the shadows. A cry rang out. Another figure dropped. Adrenaline surged hot through his veins. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but the instincts were back. The training had never left, and with Ranger at his side, he wasn't alone. They fought their way deeper into the trees, each step carrying them farther from the glowing cabin, deeper into black wilderness. Samuel's mind raced as fast as his pulse. If they wanted the safe so badly, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about gold or heirlooms. It was about something bigger, something dangerous, and his father had hidden it for a reason. By the time the forest fell silent again, Samuel and Ranger were bloodied, breathless but alive. They collapsed near a creek, moonlight glinting off the rippling water. Samuel dipped his hands, washing grime from his face, watching blood spiral away downstream. Ranger pressed close. Fur bristled, but eyes steady, waiting. Samuel stared at his reflection in the water, the weight of it all pressing down. His father's journals, the safe, the men who would kill for them. He wasn't just caught in the middle. He was the target, and whatever secret the old man had locked away in that cabin. The world was willing to bleed for it. The forest was silent again. Too silent. Samuel crouched by the creek, every muscle wound tight, listening for pursuit. The night air hung heavy, cool mist rising from the water, carrying the faint copper tang of blood. Ranger sat at his side, chest heaving, tongue lolling, eyes never leaving the tree line. His black fur was streaked with dirt, his breathing shallow but steady. Samuel rested a hand on the shepherd's neck. "You did good, boy," he whispered, voice rough. Ranger pressed against him, a living anchor in the chaos. But Samuel knew the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. He scanned the creek bed for signs of pursuit. Nothing. Whoever had survived the firefight must have fallen back to regroup, or maybe they thought he was dead. Either way, it gave him time. He filled his canteen, splashed, cold water on his face, and forced himself to breathe. The adrenaline had begun to fade, leaving behind exhaustion and a deep ache in every bone. But there was no room for weakness now. He still had his father's journals strapped to his pack, still had Ranger, and still had a burning need to know what was hidden inside that safe. By dawn, Samuel had reached a remote hunting cabin he remembered from childhood hikes. The place had long been abandoned, the roof sagging, the windows cracked. But it was shelter. He secured the door with a rusted latch, then spread a blanket across the floor. Ranger curled beside him, head resting on Samuel's leg. Only then did he pull out the leather-bound journal, the one filled with coded passages his father had left for him. For hours he worked, scratching letters onto scrap paper, his father's cipher unfolding in fragments beneath his pen. Ranger slept, the steady rhythm of his breathing grounding Samuel as numbers and symbols danced before his eyes. Then, suddenly, it clicked. His father hadn't used a simple substitution. The cipher was layered, built on an algorithm Samuel hadn't seen since his time in Special Forces. A mix of military-grade code and personal keys, dates, names, coordinates. He decoded one line, then another, his pulse quickening as words took shape. Shipment confirmed. Transfer through Oak Haven Airfield. Primary contact, C. Vance. Samuel froze. His brother's name leapt off the page like a bullet. Caleb, the smug, arrogant younger sibling who had mocked their father's service, who had sneered at the rusted cabin as a monument to failure. Now his name was here, buried in coded military logs. Samuel's gut clenched. His father had been tracking Caleb, and what he'd found was damning. Page after page revealed the same pattern: arms shipments, disguised as tech exports, shell corporations routing money offshore, meetings coded by location, and always Caleb at the center. But it wasn't just Caleb. Another name surfaced: Isabel Vance, his sister. Samuel rubbed his temple, heart sinking. Isabel's art gallery. The glittering parties. The endless money. It had all been a facade. His siblings weren't just greedy. They were neck-deep in something darker, and his father had known. Samuel set the journal aside, staring at the cracked ceiling. A memory rose unbidden. His father sitting at the cabin table, polishing his boots, voice calm but firm. "Your family will test you, son. Blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Sometimes it means betrayal." At the time, Samuel had thought it was just one of his father's cryptic lessons. Now he understood. His father had left him this burden because he was the only one who could be trusted, and the safe and whatever was in it wasn't meant for Caleb or Isabel. It was meant for him. He pulled out the last notebook, the one with the heaviest lock of cipher. His father had marked it with a single phrase on the first page: "If you're reading this, the time has come." Samuel's pulse quickened. Hours passed as he worked through the dense text, the sun climbing higher outside. Finally, the message emerged, inside. "The safe you will find evidence of an arms trafficking network spanning decades. Names, accounts, contracts. Your siblings are not pawns, they are architects. They have already caused bloodshed. More will come." Samuel's hand shook as he read the next line. "The files in the safe are not just evidence, they are leverage, protection, but they must never fall into the wrong hands. Trust no one." Beneath the passage, his father had scrawled, "Coordinates. And one final sentence: if you doubt me, remember Kandahar." Samuel's breath caught. His vision blurred. Kandahar. The mission that had haunted him for years. The IED that had killed his best friend, Sergeant Ryan. Was his father saying Caleb and Isabel had supplied the components for that bomb? His stomach turned. His siblings hadn't just betrayed the family, they had betrayed the country, and Ryan's blood was on their hands. The sound of Ranger's growl snapped him back. The shepherd stood rigid at the window, teeth bared. Samuel followed his gaze. 2 black SUVs crawling up the dirt road, dust clouds rising in their wake. Not mercenaries this time. Government plates. Samuel's pulse hammered. Trust no one. The vehicles stopped. Doors opened. Men in suits stepped, out flanked by armed agents in tactical gear. One figure strode ahead, tall, sharp-eyed, her dark hair pulled tight. Agent Reed, the federal officer, who had promised she'd watch over him after the funeral. Samuel's breath caught. Relief. Fought with suspicion, she raised a hand in greeting, voice calm. "Samuel, we need to talk about your father's work." Ranger growled low. Hackles raised. Samuel's grip tightened on the journal. His father's warning thundered in his mind. Trust no one. Reed's gaze flicked to the journal in his hand, then to Ranger. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Why? Don't you come with us, we can keep you safe. Safe or silenced." Samuel stepped back, heart racing, the journal heavy in his palm. He looked at Ranger. The shepherd's gaze was locked on Reed, teeth bared, every muscle taut with warning. And in that moment Samuel knew Reed wasn't here to protect him. She was here to take everything. "Sorry," Samuel said softly, backing toward the rear door. "But I don't trust anyone who shows up with an army." Reed's smile vanished. Her hand lifted. "Stop him!" The forest erupted again as Samuel and Ranger bolted into the trees, gunfire chasing them through the dawn. And Samuel realized, with bone-deep certainty, this wasn't just a family betrayal, it went higher, much higher. The forest swallowed them whole. Samuel sprinted through the undergrowth, lungs burning, branches tearing at his jacket. Gunfire rattled behind him, snapping through bark, but Ranger darted ahead, weaving effortlessly through the trees. "Keep going, boy," Samuel gasped, clutching the journal tight to his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to fight back, to turn and lay down, suppressing fire like he'd been trained. But this wasn't Kandahar. He wasn't surrounded by brothers in arms. He was alone. Alone, except for Ranger. They broke free into a clearing, Samuel diving behind a rotted log. Ranger crouched beside him, ears pricked, chest heaving. The gunfire ceased. The forest fell still again, too still. "They're holding position," Samuel muttered, scanning the ridgeline. "Waiting me out." He wiped sweat from his brow, heart pounding. He couldn't afford a standoff. Not here, not now. The safe was still in the cabin, his father's final piece of the puzzle. If Reed got there first, if the files fell into her hands, then everything would be lost. Samuel pushed himself up, forcing his legs to move. He didn't head straight for the cabin. That would be suicide. Instead, he angled deeper into the woods, taking paths he remembered from childhood hunting trips. Ranger stayed glued to his side, occasionally darting ahead to sniff the air. Then, circling back. Hours passed like this, the sun climbing higher, the weight of pursuit pressing heavy on Samuel's shoulders. He rationed his water, chewing on stale jerky while his mind churned. Memories of Reed flashed through him, her crisp suit at the funeral, her sympathetic tone, the way she'd said, "You can trust me, Samuel." And now, showing up with an armed detail. His father had been right all along. Trust was a weapon. Misplaced, it killed. By dusk, Samuel reached the edge of the valley. From the ridge he could see it, the old cabin where this nightmare had begun. It looked so ordinary from a distance, weathered wood, sagging roof, chimney leaning just slightly to the left. But Samuel knew better. Inside, beneath that rotted floorboard, was the safe. The final truth. Ranger whined softly, tail flicking. His hackles were raised. Samuel followed his gaze and froze. Two figures moved through the clearing near the cabin, rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Not mercenaries this time. Tactical gear. Government issue. Reed's people. They were guarding the cabin. Samuel's jaw tightened. "They're ahead of us, boy." He ran a hand through Ranger's fur, steadying himself. "But this is our home turf. We know these woods better than they do." He'd learned long ago that brute force rarely won battles. Strategy did, and Ranger had just the nose for strategy. For the next 2 hours, Samuel observed from the tree line, memorizing guard rotations. 2 outside at all times, 1 circling the cabin perimeter every 15 minutes. A vehicle parked nearby, engine still warm. Inside. Couldn't be sure, but the safe was in there, and every second wasted was another second Reed got closer to breaking it. Samuel pressed a hand against the journal strapped to his chest. His father's words echoed. "If you doubt me, remember Kandahar." He did remember. The loss. The betrayal. The feeling of being used like a pawn. Not again. This time he'd see the truth before anyone else could twist it. Night fell. Darkness cloaked the valley. Samuel slipped from cover, moving low, every step measured. Ranger shadowed him silently, a black wraith in the undergrowth. At the first guard's patrol point, Samuel waited until the man paused to light a cigarette. Rookie mistake. Samuel struck fast, one arm around the man's throat, cutting off air before he could raise alarm. The body slumped silently to the ground. Ranger padded over, sniffing once before standing watch. "One down," Samuel murmured. They crept closer. The second guard leaned against the cabin wall, humming under his breath. He didn't even see Ranger until it was too late. The shepherd lunged, clamping teeth around the man's wrist, yanking the rifle aside. Samuel closed the distance in an instant, slamming the butt of his pistol into the man's temple. The guard crumpled unconscious. Ranger released him, tail low but eyes sharp. "That's my boy," Samuel whispered, scratching his ear. Now only the inside remained. Samuel slipped through the back door, the hinges groaning softly. The cabin smelled of dust, wood smoke, and memory. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a gunshot in his chest. Ranger stayed close, ears swiveling at every sound. Samuel's heart hammered as he moved to the corner. The loose floorboard was still there, untouched. He pried it free, revealing the safe beneath. A battered steel box, scarred by time but unyielding. This was it, the secret his father had built his life around. The secret people were willing to kill. For he pulled the final cipher from the journal, hands trembling. His father's notes had been clear. The code to the safe was hidden within. He traced the sequence, numbers, dates, coordinates. Then he froze. The last number wasn't written. It was burned into the page. A single digit, 7. His father's lucky number, the number of men Samuel had lost in Kandahar. The number of times his father had said, "A man's loyalty is proven, not spoken." With a deep breath, Samuel entered the sequence. The lock clicked. The safe creaked open. Samuel expected stacks of cash, weapons, maybe gold. What he saw instead made his stomach twist. Files, hundreds of them, photographs, contracts, bank transfers, names of officials, American, foreign, military, corporate, and at the very top a manila folder labeled with a single word, Kandahar. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside were blueprints of IED components, serial numbers of weapons shipments, financial records tying them all back to shell companies, and one name repeated again and again, Caleb Vance, his own brother. Samuel's vision blurred. His father hadn't just suspected Caleb, he'd proven it. Caleb had been supplying arms that killed American soldiers. That killed Samuel's best friend, and he hadn't done it alone. A second name appeared alongside his. Over and over. Agent Reed. Samuel's breath caught. The agent who had comforted him. The one who had sworn to protect him. She hadn't been hunting him to silence a rogue witness. She'd been protecting herself. Ranger growled low, sensing Samuel's rage. "Easy, boy," Samuel whispered, though his own hands trembled with fury. The betrayal burned hotter than anything he'd ever felt. His brother, his sister, and Reed, all tangled together in a web of greed and blood. And now he had the proof. But proof meant nothing if he didn't survive long enough to reveal it. A floorboard creaked behind him. Samuel spun, pistol raised. In the doorway stood Reed herself, her pistol already trained on his chest. She smiled, cold and confident. "I see you found it," she said softly. "Good. Saves me the trouble." Ranger snarled, teeth bared, ready to lunge. Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger, his pulse thundering in his ears. And in that suspended moment, he realized. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a war he never asked for. The barrel of Reed's pistol gleamed in the dim cabin light. Samuel's own weapon was steady, aimed squarely at her chest, but his finger didn't twitch. Years of combat training told him to fire first, end the threat. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was his family's cabin. His father's safe was open at his feet, spilling a storm of betrayal into the world. And Reed. The woman he'd let into his grief, the one who had wrapped her arms around him at the funeral, whispering that she would watch his back. Now she stood ready to kill him. "Put the gun down, Samuel," Reed said softly, her voice smooth as silk, as if coaxing a child. "You're out of your depth. You don't understand the scale of what you're holding." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I understand enough. My father didn't die protecting dirt and trees. He died protecting this. And you were right there, beside him." Her smile didn't waver. "Your father knew how the world worked. He wasn't naive. He knew wars aren't fought just on the battlefield. They're funded, engineered, managed. The people in these files? They're untouchable. Do you really think you can topple governments with a manila folder and a dog?" Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating through the cabin floor. His teeth glinted in the faint light, eyes locked, on Reed like a predator waiting for the command. Samuel didn't lower his gun. "If my father trusted me with this, then I don't need to topple governments. I just need to make sure the truth comes out." Reed's eyes hardened. "That's the one thing I can't let happen." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Samuel's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He thought of Ryan, of his father, of the promises left unspoken. For the first time in years, he felt clarity. The weight of grief and betrayal burned away, leaving only purpose. He would not let Reed or his siblings bury the truth. "You're not walking out of here with these files," Samuel said, voice steady. Reed tilted her head slightly. "Then, neither are you." Her finger twitched on the trigger. Ranger moved first. With a guttural snarl, the German shepherd lunged. Reed fired, the shot exploding in the confined space. Splinters burst from the wall inches from Samuel's head. Ranger hit her full force, teeth clamping onto her arm, twisting her pistol aside. Samuel dove forward, tackling Reed to the ground. The pistol skittered across the floorboards. They grappled, fists and elbows flying. Reed fought with the precision of someone trained to kill, sharp jabs, knees aimed at vital spots. Samuel absorbed the blows, countering with raw soldier's strength. Years of anger poured out of him in every strike, not just against Reed, but against Caleb, against Isabel, against every faceless man who'd turned war into profit. Reed caught him with an elbow to the jaw, sending stars across his vision. She scrambled for the pistol, but Ranger clamped onto her sleeve, yanking her back. Samuel seized the moment, slamming his shoulder into her and pinning her against the wall. Her eyes blazed with fury. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just another soldier bleeding for causes you don't understand." Samuel's fist tightened. "Maybe, but at least I still bleed for something real." The struggle burst out of the cabin door, crashing into the night air. Moonlight bathed the clearing as they tumbled down the porch steps. Reed twisted free, rolling to her feet and drawing a concealed blade. The steel glinted as she slashed, narrowly missing Samuel's throat. He stumbled back, breath ragged, eyes locked on the knife. Ranger circled, snarling, darting in and out to "Distract her! Call him off!" Reed barked, blade flashing. "Or I'll gut him first." Samuel's blood boiled. "You so much as touch him, and you'll never see the sunrise." Reed smirked, circling. "Loyalty. Always your weakness." "Always your father's too. That's why we won, Samuel. Because we know loyalty is just a leash." The words twisted something inside him, reigniting the fire in his chest. He lunged. The fight was vicious, brutal. Steel clashed against skin and bone. Samuel's arms bled from shallow cuts as he wrestled for control of the blade. Reed moved with deadly grace, striking with the calm efficiency of a killer who had ended men before. But Samuel had something she didn't. He wasn't fighting for money. He wasn't fighting for control. He was fighting for truth, for loyalty, for Ranger, who darted in, snapping at Reed's heels, forcing her to divide her focus. Every time her attention flickered, Samuel pressed harder, until finally he seized her wrist, twisting the knife free. He held it against her throat, both of them panting, sweat and blood mingling in the moonlight. Reed's expression didn't crack. If anything, she looked impressed. "Go ahead," she whispered. "Kill me. Then what? You think you'll get out of here alive? My people are everywhere." Samuel's grip tightened. For a moment, the temptation burned white-hot. End it here. One thrust, and the woman who betrayed him, who betrayed his father, would be gone. But then he felt Ranger press against his leg, grounding him. He looked down into his dog's eyes, loyal, steady, a reminder of who he was. Samuel wasn't a killer, in the dark. Not anymore. He released Reed, shoving her to the ground. "I'm not like you," he said coldly. "That's why I'll win." Reed scrambled back, fury flashing across her face, but before she could recover, headlights flared across the clearing. A convoy of vehicles roared up the dirt road, tires spitting gravel. Doors slammed. Boots hit the ground in unison. Dozens of armed men in tactical gear fanned out, rifles trained on Samuel and Ranger. Reed pushed herself to her feet, brushing dirt. From her jacket, the knife still in her hand. "See?" she said, her voice steady again. "Checkmate." Samuel's stomach dropped. He was surrounded, outgunned. The safe was still open behind him, its secrets laid bare. But he wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. He raised his hands slowly, meeting Reed's cold gaze. "You forgot something," he said. She arched an eyebrow. "Oh?" Samuel glanced down at Ranger, whose ears twitched at his words. "I'm never alone." Before Reed could process, Ranger barked sharply. Once, from the darkness of the tree line, a low hum split the night. Then another. Drones. Dozens of them. Their lights blinked red as they hovered into view, cameras trained, live streaming every angle of the standoff. Reed's confident smile faltered for the first time. Samuel's voice cut through the night, loud and steady. Every second of this is broadcasting live, every name, every file, every bullet. The whole world is watching, Agent Reed. Gasps rippled through the armed men. Some lowered their rifles, exchanging uneasy glances. Reed's face contorted with rage. You don't know what you've started, Samuel. This goes higher than you can imagine. You can't fight all of us. Samuel stepped forward, Ranger at his side, the blade still in his hand. Maybe not, he said. But I don't need to fight you. I just need the world to see you. The clearing buzzed with tension. The soldiers hesitated, their faith in Reed wavering under the harsh glare of exposure. And in that fragile silence, Samuel realized the battle wasn't about fists or bullets. It was about truth, about tearing away the shadows his father had dedicated his life to fighting. The world would judge Reed and Caleb, and this time the world would know the truth. But before Samuel could breathe victory, a single gunshot cracked. One of the men by the convoy lowered his rifle, smoke curling from the barrel. Reed staggered, shock flashing across her face. She clutched her side, crimson blooming across her jacket. Her eyes widened, fury and betrayal mingling. She mouthed a single word, Caleb, before collapsing to the ground. Samuel whipped around. At the edge of the convoy stood his brother, Caleb. Vance dressed sharp, calm as death, pistol still raised. His voice carried cold across the clearing. Hello, brother? The night seemed to freeze the instant Caleb stepped forward. His pistol was still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Reed's body crumpled at his feet. Every man in the clearing turned to him, rifles wavering, eyes uncertain. They had expected to follow Reed's orders, but now Caleb had stolen command with a single bullet. Samuel's chest heaved, his weapon still clutched in his hand, but his gaze locked on his brother. It had been years since he had seen Caleb in person. In Samuel's memory, Caleb was still the kid with sharp eyes and sharper ambitions, the one who mocked their father's stubborn ideals. Now he stood dressed in tailored black, radiating the cold confidence of a man who had traded loyalty for power long ago. Always dramatic, Caleb said, lowering the pistol casually, as if executing Reed had been no more important than brushing dust off his suit. But necessary, she forgot her place. Samuel's throat felt dry. You murdered your own handler, your ally. Caleb shrugged. She overplayed her hand, tried to control me, just like father, just like you. I've learned something you never did, brother. If someone becomes a liability, you cut them out. Permanently. Ranger growled low, fur bristling, but Samuel kept his eyes fixed on Caleb. You funded the bomb that killed Ryan, Samuel said, his voice rough with fury. You sold weapons to the men we bled to stop, and now you stand here preaching about cutting liabilities. Caleb's lips curved in a faint smirk. I call it evolution. The world doesn't run on loyalty, Sam. It runs on leverage, money, fear. You of all people should know that. You fought for loyalty and came home broken with nothing to show for it. Samuel's fists clenched. The rage threatened to spill over, but he forced it down. Not yet. Not here. You've destroyed everything Father stood for, Samuel said. Everything he tried to protect. Do you even realize what you've become? Caleb's eyes narrowed, his smile fading. I've become a survivor, and I'm offering you the same chance. The men around them shifted, glancing between the brothers. The air was thick with tension, the hum of drones still buzzing overhead, their cameras capturing every second. Caleb gestured toward the safe, toward the files, spilling out like veins of poison. Think about it, Sam, he said smoothly. With those files, we control the narrative. We decide who gets exposed, who gets spared. Together, we could shape the world. You wouldn't have to be the forgotten soldier anymore. You could matter again. Samuel stared at him, stunned by the audacity. You think this is about me? He asked, voice sharp. You think this is about recognition? Caleb tilted his head, studying him. It always is. Why else did you enlist? Why else did you keep chasing Father's approval? Deep down, you wanted to matter. I'm giving you a way to do that. Not as a pawn, as a partner. For a moment, the clearing seemed to shrink, the world narrowing to just the two brothers, one offering power, the other clinging to principles buried in loyalty and blood. Samuel thought of Ryan, of his father, of Ranger pressing against him when the nightmares came, His voice was steady when he answered. I don't need to matter to the world, Caleb. I just need to honor the people who mattered to me, and I won't betray them for you. Caleb's expression hardened, the last flicker of brotherly warmth extinguished. So be it, he said coldly. He raised his pistol. The world exploded into chaos. Samuel dove behind the porch as bullets shattered the air. Men shouted, the line between allegiance and doubt snapping like a frayed rope. Some fired at Samuel, others hesitated, unnerved by the drones hovering overhead. Ranger darted into the chaos, a blur of fur and teeth, knocking a rifleman off balance before vanishing into the shadows again. Samuel's instincts roared to life. He rolled from cover, firing controlled bursts, forcing Caleb's men to scatter. The clearing became a battlefield, splintered wood, muzzle flashes, shouts mixing with the constant drone hum above. Caleb moved with calculated calm, his shots precise, forcing Samuel to keep shifting. They weren't just trading bullets. They were trading years of buried hatred. Samuel sprinted toward the cabin, Ranger leaping at his side. Inside, he grabbed the files from the safe, shoving them into a duffel bag. The truth couldn't die here, not in this dirt clearing. But Caleb was waiting. As Samuel burst back through the cabin door, Caleb was there, pistol raised. The shot came, grazing Samuel's shoulder, spinning him into the porch railing. Pain flared, hot and blinding, but Samuel gritted his teeth, clutching the duffel. You never learn, brother, Caleb said, stalking closer. You keep fighting battles you can't win. Samuel spat blood, glaring up at him. Funny, father used to say the same thing about you. Caleb's smile twisted. And look where it got him. The words sliced deeper than the wound. Rage surged, but Samuel didn't let it consume him. Instead, he dropped the duffel, kicked it across the porch and lunged. They collided with brutal force, fists swinging, years of resentment erupting in every strike. Caleb fought like a man who had spent years hiring others to do his dirty work. Sharp, efficient, but lacking the grit of someone who had survived foxholes and firefights. Samuel had grit in spades. He absorbed Caleb's blows, driving him back with raw strength. Caleb slashed with a hidden blade, nicking Samuel's ribs, but Samuel countered with a headbutt that sent his brother sprawling. Ranger launched, clamping onto Caleb's arm, dragging him back down. Caleb screamed, kicking, but Samuel barked, "Hold!" And Ranger released, circling with a snarl. Samuel pressed his boot onto Caleb's chest, pinning him. The knife was in Samuel's hand, now its edge glinting in the drone light. Caleb coughed, blood on his lips, but his smirk returned. Go ahead, kill me. But remember, the world doesn't change because of truth. It changes because of power, and if you kill me here, you'll prove I was right. Samuel's hand trembled, the blade inches from Caleb's throat. The rage screamed for release, for Ryan, for father, for every life Caleb's greed had destroyed. But then Ranger nudged his leg, steady and grounding, the same way he had in that dusty Montana kitchen. Samuel's breath came hard and ragged. He looked at his brother, broken beneath him, and realized killing him would only bury the truth. Justice wasn't vengeance. Justice was exposure. Slowly, Samuel lowered the blade. No, he said, voice sharp with finality. I won't give you that satisfaction. Shouts erupted from the tree line. Vehicles thundered down the dirt road. Federal agents in tactical gear swarmed into the clearing, weapons raised. Agent Reed's backup, summoned by the drone's live stream, had arrived at last. Men dropped their weapons, some fleeing into the forest, others surrendering under the floodlights. Agents cuffed Caleb, dragging him to his feet. His smirk never faded. This isn't over, brother, he called, as they pulled him toward a waiting truck. You think you've won, but the world will always need men like me. And when it does, you'll be forgotten again. Samuel didn't respond. He just knelt, wrapping his arms around Ranger, burying his face in the dog's fur. For the first time in years, the storm inside him was silent. The next morning, headlines erupted across every screen in the nation. Veteran exposes international arms network. Billions in illegal sales tied to prominent tech CEO and art dealer. Dog and soldier uncover cabin secrets that shock the world. The files had gone public. Every name, every transaction, every drop of blood money laid bare. Caleb and Isabel were indicted, their empire shattered, and Samuel Vance, once mocked as a broken recluse hiding in a rusted cabin, was hailed as the man who tore down an empire of shadows. But none of that mattered to him. As he stood on the porch of the cabin, Ranger at his side watching the sun rise over the Montana mountains, he felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. He reached down, scratching Ranger behind the ears. "We did it, boy," he murmured. "We kept the promise." Ranger wagged his tail, eyes bright, ears tuned to the wind. The cabin was still rusted, the paint still peeling, but it no longer felt like a tombstone. It felt like a beginning, and this time, Samuel wasn't alone. The mountains had grown quieter in the weeks that followed. Snow dusted the peaks in the distance, and the air carried the crisp bite of winter's approach. For the first time in years, Samuel Vance allowed himself to sit on the creaking porch, swing of his cabin, his shoulders relaxed, his rifle leaning unused by the door. Beside him, Ranger lay sprawled across the wooden planks, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, the faint scar on his flank now healed. Samuel scratched him, behind the ears, the way he always did when words weren't enough. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered. News outlets had feasted on the story for weeks, each headline bigger than the last. Anchors debated the fallout on primetime television, showing clips of armored agents hauling boxes of files from hidden bunkers, while experts called it the most significant arms trafficking exposure of the decade. Caleb's name became a curse across the country. Once a rising star in the tech and art worlds, his reputation was obliterated overnight. He was indicted on dozens of counts: treason, conspiracy, financial crimes, arms trafficking. He fought with the arrogance Samuel had expected, his lawyers drowning the courts in motions, his smirk never far from his face. But the evidence was overwhelming, and for once Caleb's money couldn't buy him freedom. Isabel's empire collapsed too. Every gallery, every offshore account, every shadowy transaction Samuel and Ranger had unearthed was dragged into the light. She vanished for a while, slipping between borders, but eventually, even her luck ran out. Justice wasn't quick. It never was. But it was real, and Samuel had lived to see it. The cabin, once mocked by locals as nothing more than a rusted relic, became something else. Reporters had swarmed to it at first, hungry for photos of the forgotten veteran who shook the world. Drones buzzed overhead, strangers trampled through the grass, and Samuel had nearly packed up and left it all behind. But Ranger had nudged him again, grounding him. And Samuel realized the cabin wasn't just a place anymore. It was proof. Proof that even the most unassuming places could hide truths capable of shaking nations. Proof that loyalty, not power, had turned the tide. Proof that Ryan's sacrifice had not been forgotten. So he stayed. And slowly, the world stopped gawking. The reporters left. The story cooled. Life somehow began again. Samuel found himself rebuilding. Not just the porch rail Caleb's bullets had splintered, or the door still scarred from forced entries, but himself. The nightmares came less often. The shadows in his mind no longer ruled him. Sometimes veterans from nearby towns came by, drawn not by headlines but by word of mouth. They sat on the porch with him, sharing coffee, swapping stories that only men who'd worn the same scars could understand. They didn't see him as a relic. They saw him as a reminder. That broken didn't mean finished. Samuel never set out to be a symbol. But somehow the cabin and the dog at his side had made him one, and he could live with that. As for Ranger, the world adored him. Clips of the dog leaping through firelight, pulling men to the ground, standing guard beside his master, had gone viral. Online, Ranger was hailed as the dog who saved America, but Samuel never saw him that way. To Samuel, Ranger wasn't a hero for what he had done in the clearing that night. He was a hero for every moment before, every time he had pressed close when Samuel's chest grew tight, every time he'd sat silent when words failed, every time he'd reminded him that survival was still worth it. The bond they shared was deeper than headlines. It was carved from blood and silence, loyalty and trust, and no camera could capture that. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Samuel walked with Ranger down the old logging trail. The forest was alive with crickets and the distant call of an owl. He thought of his father then and of Ryan. For years their memories had haunted him like ghosts chained to his chest. Now they felt lighter, like companions walking with him, instead of weights dragging him down. "Guess we finally did it, huh?" he murmured, glancing down at Ranger. The dog tilted his head, ears pricking. "We kept the promise," Samuel continued. "Didn't let their sacrifices be forgotten. Didn't let the truth die with them." Ranger wagged his tail, and Samuel smiled faintly. It wasn't triumph he felt. It wasn't even pride. It was peace, something he had once thought impossible. Months later, Samuel received a letter, an invitation really. A foundation dedicated to veterans wanted him to speak. Not as a soldier, not even as the man who exposed an arms ring, but simply as someone who had endured. At first, he almost declined. He had no interest in stages or spotlights. But then he looked at Ranger, and he remembered what it felt like to think he was alone, forgotten in a rusted cabin. If his story could keep even one man from falling into that same silence, maybe it was worth it. So he said yes. The night of the event, Samuel stood at the edge of the stage, Ranger at his side. A room full of strangers waited, their applause fading into quiet expectation. He took a breath, steadying himself. "I'm not here as a hero," he began. His voice was low but carried through the hall. "I'm just a man who was lost. A man who thought his life was over. A man who found a reason to keep going because of loyalty, because of love, because of a dog who refused to give up on me." Ranger thumped his tail against the floor and the room rippled with soft laughter. Samuel's lips curved in the faintest smile. "You've heard the headlines. You know the story the world wanted to tell. But what matters isn't the cabin, or the files, or the men I fought against. What matters is this. Sometimes the smallest bond can change everything. Sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about who stands with you when you can't stand alone." For the first time in his life, Samuel wasn't speaking for approval. He wasn't chasing his father's shadow or his brother's scorn. He was speaking truth, his own. And when the applause rose thunderous and unrelenting, Samuel felt no shame in letting it wash over him, because this time, he wasn't alone. Ranger was there, always. Later that night, back at the cabin, Samuel stood on the porch with a mug of coffee. The stars spread across the Montana sky like a map of endless possibilities. The cabin creaked, the wind whispered through the trees, and Ranger pressed against his leg, steady and warm. "Home," Samuel said softly. And for the first time in years, the word didn't feel like a memory. It felt real. The world had mocked the rusted cabin, but Ranger had found the secret it held. Not the files, not the hidden vaults, not even the empire it brought crashing down. The real secret was simpler. That even the most broken man could still find his way home if he had loyalty at his side.